Hello and welcome to Joseph Clark and Sense Success virtual training session in supporting a child with a visual impairment in school. This PowerPoint will take you through how our service can provide support within the school environment. To show you, we have a typical case study and each member of the team will introduce themselves and take you through aspects of the PowerPoint. My name is Mark Bowes. So, the objectives for today's session, we're going to be using a pupil profile, who's called Eddie, to represent and highlight what our service can provide. How our service provides the support for the student. We'll take you through his condition and how the visual impairment impacts on his environment, his study, his movement, and what technological aids can help within that. Next slide. So, when we receive a referral, and this can be from anybody, but mainly we get them from hospitals or the schools. The referral has to have a signed permission slip from the parents so that we can get up-to-date medical information. We would then arrange to go into the setting or home to do a functional visual assessment. Once this has been completed, we will then look through and assess where the student sits within the NATSIP criteria. The NATSIP stands for National Sensory Impairment Partnership. And this will determine the frequency of visits that we would be doing to support that student and the education establishment. We support, once he's on the caseload, we would support Eddie whilst he is in full-time maintained education. At some point, he may require an education, health and care plan. If he was successful in getting this, then he would be potentially supported up until the age of 25 years. The QTVI would follow Eddie through his education, and at points within that, he may or she may refer to the IT manager for looking at technology to help him access the curriculum. And as he becomes more independent, the habilitation officer who can provide support for him for his mobility. Next slide.
Hello, I'm Shirley, one of the QTVIs. Now, Eddie is 7 years old. He's coming to the end of year 2. As a baby, he was diagnosed with achromatopsia, which is absence of colour vision. He has nystagmus, which is a constant rocking eye movement. Photophobia, sometimes referred to as hemerolopia, which is aversion to glare. Hypermetropia, which is a bit of long sight, and astigmatism, which is a misshapen curve of the eye. We're going to take you through to a video clip now, which is an adult in America with these eye conditions.
Blue cone monochromatism, the other form of achromatopsia. Congenital achromatopsia is a rare inherited condition. It is composed of two major forms, rod monochromatism and blue cone monochromatism. Both forms of achromatopsia can cause 4 significant impairments: debilitating glare problems, severe color blindness, reduced visual acuity, and nystagmus. BCM is found nearly exclusively in males, in 1 in every 100,000 births. It can occur in females, but the occurrence in women has been estimated as low as 1 in 10 billion. While rod monochromatism is inherited as an autosomal recessive inheritance, requiring the affected gene from each parent, BCM is an X-linked recessive condition inherited from a carrier mother. BCM passes down from the mother, who is a carrier, to the affected child, who is nearly always male. Affected males can only pass it on to their daughters. All daughters of an affected male will be carriers. All sons of the affected individual will not have the condition and will not be carriers. The carrier daughters have a 50% chance of passing it on to their children. The male children receiving it will only have one X chromosome, and thus BCM will be expressed. Females have two X chromosomes. The one unaffected X chromosome from their father is usually enough to prevent BCM from occurring. Those with BCM may frequently have a brother, maternal male cousin, or a maternal grandfather with the condition.
Do you have other family members who have this condition?
My grandfather and I have 3 cousins, males, that have the same condition as me.
Are they on your father or your mother's side of the family?
My mother's side.
To better understand blue cone monochromatism, we must understand the photoreceptors in our retina. Normally, we have both rods and cones that work independently or together depending on the brightness levels. There are 3 basic levels of cone rod function. The photopic, where we use only cone cells. This would be in all bright lighting situations. The mesopic, where both rods and cones function together. This would be a mildly dark area, but where you can still see colors. And the scotopic, where only our rod cells function. This would be in dim light like a dark moonless night. Each of the 3 cone receptors has a different light-sensitive chemical that reacts to different colors of light. We have red, green, and blue sensitive cones. All the colors we see come from the mix of these cone signals. In blue cone monochromatism, 2 genetic variants on the X chromosome at position XQ28 result in the failure of the chemical needed to detect red in the red cone cells and to detect green in the green cones. Thus, blue cone monochromats are left with only blue cone receptors and rod receptors. Optical coherence tomography allows us to cross-sectionally scan the fine layers of the retina. Here we see a normal OCT scan. The arrow shows the fovea. Normally, this is the area of our sharpest vision. It is composed of red and green cones packed tightly together. There are no rods or blue cones found in the fovea. Now we see the same scan of a patient with blue cone monochromatism. Notice the arrow pointing to the gap in the photoreceptor integrity line. The gap shows a missing signal where red and green cones would normally reside in high concentrations. This scan predicts the loss of red and green cone cells through the retina. This explains the reduced vision found in all achromats. With only one type of color receptor, blue cone monochromats have severe color vision loss. Some, however, can detect certain mild shades of blue and yellow under the right lighting conditions. This, however, does not mean that they see blue as you and I do.
Right here, from here to here, looks black to me. From about here over to here appears yellow, and then this is blue.
Since our 3 types of cone cells normally provide all of our vision in bright light, loss of the red and green cones results in severe glare problems at bright lighting. Those with BCM are left with only blue cones and rods, and the rods cannot function in bright light. This creates an overwhelming glare, a condition called hemerotopia or day blindness, and is often the most debilitating part of BCM. Here we see the scene of a normal retina. The scene would be moderately bright and in full color. Without special sun filters, the blue cone monochromat would see the scene as overwhelmingly bright and with either no color or some mild blue and yellow visible. Patients must often squint to control glare. Squinting, however, while helping darken the scene, can reduce the visual field. Aversion to light and nystagmus are often the first signs that a child has achromatopsia. Nystagmus is a rhythmic shaking of the eyes that may present at age 3 to 6 months. It is usually pendular, and as in other achromats, may decrease with age.
As a child, did your eyes have nystagmus? Did they shake? Or your parents report that they noticed a shakiness to them?
That's one way my mother figured out that I had some sort of visual problem at that point, or had the visual problem that was in her family. Was when I was a baby, my eyes would, as she called it, quiver or dance, and they would do it quite readily.
Today, they don't seem to do that, though. It seems like it's quieted down a lot, hasn't it? There's just a very fine little tremor there.
I don't even notice it myself.
The nystagmus often decreases significantly with time, and there are cases where no nystagmus has occurred. This patient reported nystagmus severe enough for his mother to recognize there was a problem as an infant. Today, at age 49, the nystagmus is very faint. The visual acuity of blue cone monochromats as a group is moderately impaired. The typical range of vision is from 20/60 to 21/20. However, some patients may be as low as 2200. The loss of cone cells in the fovea is the initial cause of reduced acuity, but the debilitating glare problems can overwhelm the patient's vision. Thus, controlling glare is the most crucial step in helping the individual with BCM. The approach, however, is different than in rod monochromatism, where red filters effectively control the glare. In BCM, we must avoid the use of solid dark red filters, as the red will block the blue light entering the eye and further reduce the patient's vision. But red filters are very effective in preventing the bleaching out of the rod photoreceptors, allowing them to function at higher light levels. And blue filters allow the blue light to pass through to the blue cones. The answer is a magenta filter, which is made from both red and blue dyes. Magenta filters allow both the red and blue light to pass to the retina. This allows both the blue cones and the rods to function better in bright light. Here, we test a patient with both red and magenta filters.
When I place this filter in, what happens?
It makes everything a lot clearer, what I can see.
And then without it, does it get worse?
It fuzzes.
Now what happens if I put the red filter in?
Then I lose most of it.
And it gets much better back.
Oh yeah. Big difference.
We can provide the magenta filters in either contact lenses or eyewear, and in different shades of magenta to custom fit each patient for inside and outside lighting. If light and glare are well controlled, some with BCM who have only mild visual acuity loss from 20/60 to 20/80 may be able to obtain a restricted driver's license. Those with less visual acuity may be able to become a bioptic driver. Bioptic drivers use special telescopic systems to aid them in driving and require extensive behind-the-wheel training. Blue cone monochromatism is usually a stable condition with minimal change over time.
Okay, I hope you found that interesting. Information about the eye conditions mentioned can be found on our website, the link there at Whitefield. You'll see our team photo and they're in alphabetical order under the heading Eye Conditions. Next. So Eddie has been registered as severely sight impaired by his consultant at Moorfields Eye Hospital, and in the optimum clinical conditions that they tested him, his best distance acuity was 660. This means he needs to be 10 times closer than his normally sighted peers to get a similar view. If there's glare in the classroom, as there often is, that vision will reduce further, and certainly outdoors. Next. This slide gives you just some flavour of where we have perfect vision at 6.6 and how nice and crisp and clear, moving to moderate visual loss at 6.18, becoming a bit more blurry, and then obviously much more reduced as we go on. Eddie has glasses. These are, we will not correct his nystagmus or chromatopsia, but they're there to help with his hypermetropia and astigmatism. He must wear them at all times, but still his vision is reduced for any desktop tasks. And outdoors, he must wear his prescription sunglasses, which have a very dark tint, to reduce glare. His vision's still reduced, and you will see Eddie outdoors with a dark peaked cap, because this helps to reduce the overhead glare.
Hello, I'm Lynn. I'm one of the QTVIs in the team, and I'm going to be talking about how Eddie can access reading and writing and worksheets in the classroom. So, as we know, Eddie's got reduced vision, so things that he does in the classroom are going to need to be adapted for him. His written work, any text or written information that he's given, needs to be in an enlarged clear bold font size N24. He also needs double line spacing to help him access the information to reduce the clutter. Any enlargements or anything that he has should be on A4 size paper. A3 enlargements are quite difficult for a child to handle. They're not always, the images and the text aren't always enlarged very clearly. And because Eddie has nystagmus, that makes it very difficult for him to try and scan a large piece of paper. Also, Eddie has in class to help a sloping desktop. So any books or worksheets he has, if he uses his sloping desktop to access these, it's going to make him much more comfortable for him and hopefully help prevent any neck or backache. So these are examples of the sort of vision that Eddie has. The images on the right-hand side are an approximate of the vision Eddie has. So using anything with a dark, high contrasted line is much more preferable to using pencil. So we would advise using things like a dark pen. Also, this gives an example of the clutter. This is why Eddie needs double line spacing, because when things are too close together, it makes it much more difficult to access. So information needs to be clear. It needs to be of good contrast and on a plain, uncluttered background. Eddie, because of his photophobia, will also probably really benefit from having his work produced on coloured paper. So a buff or a pale yellow. As he gets older, he'll be able to tell you what his preference is, but this will help reduce any glare that comes off just white paper. Also, if anything in the classroom is laminated, it's much better for Eddie if he has matte laminating sheets rather than gloss, because there's a lot of glare would come off a gloss laminating sheet. And accessing things, it's great if he can work with partners, but he's going to need his own copy of worksheets or books because it's quite difficult visually to try and share this with a partner. Now, Eddie's colour vision is going to be a real difficulty for him in class because he's only seeing in shades of grey. Anything that uses colour is going to be difficult for him. So if in class there are textbooks that are in coloured sections, don't ask him to turn to the red section. He won't be able to do that. Find other ways of telling him what to do. So, for example, if you're going to create any worksheets or diagrams that use colours, like maps of the world showing continents, if you can find a different way of trying to show the colours by using pattern instead of colour in the areas, that would be really helpful. Now, Eddie's going to need lots of information in a larger text, as I said, but things like textbooks and reading materials, he's also going to need these in a large print. So these are some examples of organisations where you can access enlarged print books. So the RNIB library, it's a postal library where Eddie could borrow large print books also on a different colour paper. Customise is an organisation where schools and families can purchase books at the same price as the original, but in his preferred font and paper colour. And also check with the local library. Sometimes they have large print books, or they might be able to get some for him. Electronic versions of books are a really great way of Eddie being able to access text quite easily. So often students use these access these books on a tablet or a Kindle, a laptop or a desktop computer. Another part of the RNIB, called RNIB Bookshare, is a free service that schools can register to so that you can access textbooks and images for Eddie. The school creates a member account and with a username and a password, and these can be shared with home so that Eddie can also access these books and download them at home too. Seeing Ear is home to the National Accessible Library. It's very similar to RNIB Bookshare. Similar thing, you can download books. Oxford Hour is also another resource that school can use. They have lots of ebooks and learning resources and assessment tools on there for students that need large print. And again, local libraries, you can borrow digital books from your local library if you're a member using your library card. Another option for Eddie, because it's quite difficult visually and it will probably take him longer to read through books, just listening to an audiobook is a great way for Eddie to access different books. RNIB Talking Books is free. He can access books from here. Calibre Audio is also a charity that lends books, audio books, to anyone who has a visual impairment. And also, again, your local library. Using apps, you can borrow audio books digitally. And some of the helpful free apps that you can use, Dolphin Easy Reader is a very good app where you can change the text and the background and the spacing on a page. And the Kindle app is also another app that you can do this. And you can also access RNI Bookshares downloads from here. And also Overdrive, Libby and BorrowBox, also apps that can be used to borrow books from your local library.
Hello, it's Mark again. So we're moving on now to writing and recording. And as we, a lot of the things that we're saying will be sort of a bit repetitive, but it's worth noting that Eddie's particular problems are his lack of colour vision, his lack of visual acuity, and his propensity to be glare having in his eyes. So we have produced here some pictures of a typical classroom and somebody looking at a classroom with full colour vision and full visual acuity. With Eddie, without wearing his glasses, he is seeing the middle picture, and as you can see, there is much reduced clarity and detail. So for Eddie, if he hasn't got his glasses on and he goes into a classroom with this sort of lighting, you can see the difficulty he's going to find when he enters that room. By putting his glasses on, he then moves over to the last box where the lack of colour vision still maintains, but he has better clarity of vision and he is able to negotiate and find his way around much, much easier. So it's very important for Eddie that he wears his glasses indoors and outdoors. So for Eddie, we've said that he uses a slope board for reading and writing. And we recognise that as Eddie gets older, he's going to be less inclined to use things that draw attention to his visual impairment, such as a slope board. So as long as he's happy to be using the slope board, praise and encourage him to continue with that, because there will be a point where he will probably start to reject these sorts of things. He uses a black fibre tip pen to increase the contrast, but also he uses dark lined square paper. These can be obtained from the Partially Sighted Society, and they come in the same book formats that his peers will be using in class, the difference being that his will have the buff coloured paper and the dark lines also on them. By using the felt tip, the black felt tip pen, if he goes over that black line, he is not going to lose it in the same way as he would lose it using the pencil, as we saw in the previous slides. So as I mentioned earlier, the Partially Sighted Society has a catalogue of these things that you can purchase. You see there the slope board with the dark lined paper and the black fibre tip pen. They also produce the rulers, which are high contrast, and the enlarged protractors. And on the left hand side you see a keyboard with high visibility stickers, and this will all help Eddie with his curriculum. He has his own set of coloured pencils, and at this particular time, with social distancing and with students sitting in their seats, this would be relevant for Eddie, as we would suggest that he has a tray of equipment that he can just collect and take to his desk, which will have all this in it for him. So the coloured pencils and pens will have the actual colour written on them, but he will also potentially need things described for him. So if he was doing an art project and he was doing some observational drawing, then somebody might need to actually say to him what colours that there are appearing on them, so he can actually then match that to his drawing. Eddie also uses a laptop as an alternative to handwriting, because for many of our students with visual impairments, handwriting, although we encourage it, it can be a very labour-intensive, very visually fatiguing thing to do. So using a laptop and having good touch typing skills is very important. Next slide.
Hi, my name's Josh. I'm another one of the teachers at the service. I'm going to be talking about 3 ways that we can support Eddie. I'll be starting off with looking at lighting, then I'll be looking at where he sits in the classroom, and finally looking at how he accesses the whiteboard or different flip charts around the room. So lighting is something that I know has already been mentioned so many times, but it's something that we can't overemphasize enough. It really does make a huge difference for a lot of the children we work with, and particularly those with photophobia, the light sensitivity. So the main thing we need to limit really is sunlight. That makes a massive difference to Eddie's vision. And the easiest way to kind of control the amount of sunlight in the classroom is to have really good blinds fitted and used continually. There's other ways that Eddie will be experiencing glare, which will be limiting his vision, and one is through screens. I don't know if you notice as you watch this video, the background of these slides are not white, they're a buff colour, and that's limiting the amount of glare, making it a little bit easier on the eyes, and it'll make a really big difference for someone like Eddie, lowering the glare. Other options would be to have something like a black background with white writing, which again would limit the glare and make it much easier for Eddie to access the board. I just should also say with lighting, it is about balance. I think sometimes it's tempting for teachers to make the room so dark, to limit the glare so much that it's really hard for Eddie to see the contrast, to see to use the functional vision he has. So it's about a balance. Do make sure that there is enough lighting, that there's good contrast for Eddie to notice, but just limiting the glare. So the second thing I'm looking at is his seating position. It's really important for Eddie to be sat at the front of the class and as central as possible, particularly making sure he's not facing a window. Again, that will limit glare. Ideally, the window would be behind him. It's also really good for all of our visually impaired students to not necessarily be on their own, but to have someone next to them, to be part of a group like anyone else, so that they can develop their social skills as well. So finally, I'll be looking at how to help Eddie access the whiteboard or flip charts or different displays around the room. And I think Shirley really summarised this at the beginning when looking at Eddie's vision with perfect lighting. I should say he needs to be 10 times closer to any visual stimulus to be able to access something. So as a teacher, if the lighting is good, there's not much glare, if you can stand 10 times further back than Eddie and still read the board with ease, then it's probably big enough. That's the kind of key thing to bear in mind. And as he's young, he might be sat at the carpet. If he's sat at the carpet very close to the board, it's really important to remember that for him, the top of the board will be about 1 metre further away than the bottom of the board. Now, equivalent for Eddie, that's 10 metres further back. So for someone with normal vision, the difference would be it's 10 metres further away. So try to keep the work at the bottom half of the board if possible, so it's as close to Eddie as possible. Other key things to bear in mind, just try and keep the handwriting very large and clear to read, for him to read. I mean, going back to what Lynn said about making sure there's good space as well as thick lines. If he's struggling to access the board, maybe let him sit at the teacher's desk. Let him sit there and view what's going on the computer screen. It's also really good practice to give Eddie a copy of the slides for the lesson on paper, ideally, you know, font 24 or 36 with double line spacing as well. And when you're referring to things on the board, rather than pointing, using kind of what I call radio language, which is, I should say, not just me. It's from someone called Gordon Dutton actually introduced me to this concept. But just rather than pointing to bits on the board, saying on the right hand side you can see this is happening, on the left hand side you can see this happening, imagining that you have limited vision as well, and trying to describe things as if you were on the radio. Finally, remembering to try and limit the colour use, and maybe using pattern rather than different colours and diagrams, maps and graphs on the board. And I'll say it again, trying to limit the glare. Use buff backgrounds or yellow backgrounds wherever possible.
Hi, my name's Ruth and I'm also a qualified teacher of the visually impaired with the service. Eddie will need tasks to be differentiated. Due to his visual impairment, it will take him a lot more time to complete tasks. Therefore, we would recommend that copying is reduced. There's very little to be gained from copying. It's very time consuming, and as Eddie has nystagmus, the constant transfer of gaze involved in copying is extremely tiring. So what we suggest is pre-printing information or having it accessible on his laptop so that the time that he's gained from not copying can be used to read the information, and that will also give him more time to answer the follow-up task to the reading. It's also helpful to reduce the length of the task without compromising the level of difficulty. For example, this can be done by having less repetition of the same type of question, by reducing the number of easier questions to allow him time to move on to the harder ones. And I know in a lot of primary schools, especially in maths, they have 3 levels of questions like bronze, silver and gold. So it's like doing fewer of the bronze questions, so Eddie has time to go on to the silver and the gold ones. Next slide, please. Assessment guidance. Eddie will need extra time for class tests and assessments, almost definitely with his visual impairment. And extra time should be given in a separate room so Eddie's not disturbed by others finishing before him. Something to bear in mind is that in national exams such as SATs, Eddie would be entitled to up to 100% extra time. So really this is just giving Eddie fair access to tests and assessments. He should also have rest breaks when he can close his eyes for a few minutes to avoid visual fatigue. And again, this is in line with a lot of the national exams where they're allowed to do this. So it's one of the concessions given even at GCSE. All tests and assessments should be in the optimum print size of bold N24 double line spaced on A4 buff coloured paper, or be available on his laptop. So again, here, whatever settings are best for him on the laptop, it might be, with a slightly dim screen, or it might be, as Shirley said earlier, with white text on a black background, or it's whatever is his preference on the laptop. Next slide, please. Eddie should do his assessments in his normal way of working. And again, this is always stressed in all the national exams that come later on. It should always be how he normally accesses work in the classroom. As we've already mentioned, achromatopsia comes with colour deficiencies. So staff are allowed to name a colour for Eddie if colour identification is needed to access a question. If it's an internal assessment, consider using different patterns, like we mentioned earlier, things like the cross-hatching dots and so on, all different textures. That could be things like corrugated card, all those kind of things. Can be used in questions for things like map work and so on, rather than using colours. Next slide, please.
Okay, it's Shirley speaking again. With PE and practical tasks, Eddie must still wear his glasses at all times. So if it's outdoor PE, he will need his prescription sunglasses and peaked cap. Ideally, he needs to be close to the teacher, within a metre or two, to see the demonstrations. Now that's not always easy, especially with outdoor PE, so this is where we'd really encourage you to provide adult support, maybe working with Eddie and a small group to demonstrate the skills or repeat the instructions to ensure he's safe to continue. It's always a good idea to encourage any visually impaired child to help set out the equipment. In doing so, they learn the span of the course or the court, whatever you're setting out. So they get a bit of a map in their mind, know how far the last piece of equipment goes. And in Eddie's case, where there's colour difficulties, it might help for him to choose resources where he can see the difference. So a very pale colour and a very dark colour, he may be able to tell the difference between the two. With other practical subjects, art, design, technology, science, again, he needs to be close to any demonstrations and may need instructions repeated. But if it's drawing, cutting out, colouring, put a black outline round what is to be cut out, and then it's easier for him to see. Next slide, please. Okay, social and emotional well-being at this time is important for all children, but in normal times it's even more so for our visually impaired children who can have struggles. So if we can develop daily communication with staff and get Eddie to be independent about saying what help he needs. So he might say he wants to move closer, he might need something to be bigger. We might have forgotten to close the blinds and he might say, it's too bright, can you close the blinds please? So daily communication so he feels comfortable. Also his pastoral support. Having a lack of vision, it's difficult to find your friends and pick up on the body language and little giggles and things that the rest of us take for granted. So having someone to talk to about his successes and his good times, but also his concerns, and teaching him how to problem solve if he is having friendship difficulties. This might involve being part of a social skills group. After COVID, there's the new rules, there's bubbles, new routines, but he's also entering a new key stage in a new building. So we really do need to keep a close eye on him and develop that conversation on a daily basis. And finally, we find with all our visually impaired young children, they do like to have a buddy system, so there's always someone to play with. This can include designating a buddy stop, maybe a bench or a tree, and ideally in the shade for Eddie, so that if he loses sight of his friends, they will come and find him.
Hello, my name is George Christou and I'm the IT manager for the Joseph Clark service. I assessed Eddie at the end of year 1 and an IT report was produced with recommendations and this was sent to the school. For the IT assessment, I used a 2-in-1 laptop and a portable handheld electronic magnifier. The 2-in-1 laptop has a touchscreen which Eddie used to start programs and desktop applications, and also it folds back and turns into a 15.6-inch anti-glare tablet which Eddie used to access school educational applications. Also, the added bonus of the 2-in-1 laptop is the actual keyboard itself folds behind the screen, which allows us to have it as a stand, and therefore we can bring the screen closer to Eddie without having to worry about the distance between the keyboard and himself. And this allowed us to focus on bringing the interactive whiteboard, broadcasting that image to his screen, so whatever was on the board, whatever the teacher was using, Eddie had the option of viewing this at a much closer distance at a 15.6-inch anti-glare screen. The portable handheld electronic magnifier was used for reading. Eddie was able to place this, which has a built-in stand, onto his books, hard copies, any documents that the teacher was given him, and he can then pinch zoom, which is a touchscreen, increase the size of the font he was looking at, create his own background color scheme. So if he felt that there was too much light, or it was too bright, or if there was any possible glare that was coming off the actual screen, he can change the background. For example, dark blue background, and then he could have yellow font. Also, the great thing about the portable handheld electronic magnifier is if he was reading anything, so let's say he wanted to focus on a certain line, he could create a line marker, so he was able to specifically read the sentence that he was more focused on reading. And also, if his friends wanted to borrow that book that he was using to increase the size of the text, he can capture the image and then pass the book to his friend. He's still got the added bonus of that image on his electronic magnifier, so he can read it or copy or whatever he needs to do. It's there in front of him. And also, with the electronic magnifier, he can hold it up, point it to different areas, different parts of the classroom where there's display boards, where there's text and images. Maybe he was unable to see these before, and again, he can zoom in, he can change the colors, he can take a picture, and this gives him more independence. It gives him greater access to what's around the room, as well as reading his books and any hard copies. We have a little video here from the company that's created the product. It's called the Explore 8 from Humanware. Let's have a look at that.
Humanware introduces Explore 8, its latest handheld electronic magnifier. Featuring an 8-inch touchscreen, the Explore 8 is smaller, lighter, and more affordable than most 7-inch magnifiers on the market. Designed for active people who prefer a large screen, but still want a device they can carry around. With its elegant and streamlined design, the device comes with a durable reading stand that sets up in seconds. Intuitive and easy to use, the touchscreen makes adjustments a breeze, while the twin UHD camera delivers outstanding image quality. The Explore 8 may be compact, but it packs a powerful punch with a range of cutting-edge customized features to help keep things in focus. The Explore 8 features a twin 21-megapixel camera, one for close viewing and a second camera for distance viewing, to see things like street and store signs more clearly. With the Explore 8, you can enjoy all the benefits of a large screen in a compact portable package with zero compromise on style, quality, and comfort.
Okay, now with this equipment and software in place, at the start of year 2, we created the block of training. What I did was, firstly, I worked very closely with the IT department to create an adapted school network user account. Very simply, what this means is that all the findings and the readings that I received and got from Eddie in the IT assessment, I was able to design his school network user account. So we were able to increase the size of the desktop icons, so it wasn't so cluttered on the screen. So we had 3 or 4 rather than 24. We were able to create a dark, bold background, so we can make the actual apps or the actual icons a lot bigger, more clearer to him, more visible. We worked on adapting the size of the cursor, the menus and titles, making them nice and clear and bold, the scroll bar, and ultimately designing the school network user account exactly for Eddie, exactly how he would like to see it. We also worked on establishing a link from the interactive whiteboard to his laptop. This was best done through the network. The reason we did this is because it allows Eddie now to log into any machine, any area of the school with his 2-in-1 laptop, and he will have that access to any interactive whiteboard. We introduced a touch typing program. This is a free online program called Typing Club. It's a fantastic typing program, fully accessible. You can access, you can make changes to the colors, the font sizes. It also has the audio option to read back the letters and to tell you what letters coming next. But also there's a lot of games as well. So it keeps it inclusive, interactive, and ultimately quite entertaining for the student. I worked closely with his support staff so we can keep a log of his progress, because it's very important to document his words per minute, his accuracy rate, what exercise is on, but also at the same time, Typing Club does have a progress report, so you can print that off so you know where you are with his daily routine. And I would say this is something that should be done 10 to 15 minutes every day. The training consisted of not just implementing the hardware and the software and all these programs, but also to make this specific to Eddie, because the equipment and the software has to be used to the best of ability to get to the best he can get from his subjects. So what we did was we ensured that we worked on the products for Eddie as it stands right now in his school education. And in the future, in year 3, we're going to continue to look at his access to ICT, but focus also and introduce Microsoft shortcuts, because it's important that Eddie learns to use the keyboard as the mouse. But of course, this is going to take some time. We've got to look at electronic books. We've got to look at apps like Oxford Owl, the Kindle app, software to download relevant books, and the RNIB and the Bookshare seems to be a great one to do this. Create subject folders and make things accessible for Eddie so he's confident and he's able to use his computer within his curriculum subjects.
Hello, my name's Avril. I'm the mobility specialist. We're sometimes known as habilitation specialists or rehabilitation officers, but we all do the same thing, and that's to further safety and independence with the children who we work with. Today, I'm going to refer to myself as the mobility specialist. So we're going to continue to talk about how Eddie can be supported by the mobility specialist as he begins to transition from year 2 to 3. So if we look at the next slide, we can see how really important it is that Eddie gets the support that he needs from the mobility specialist, because any kind of change will affect him. For example, socially, there may be new pupils in Eddie's class who are unaware of his needs. Eddie may also experience anxiety because everything is new. He's got a new classroom layout, it's completely different. The playground's new. There are even new toilets and routes around the school that have changed. All of these things are much more difficult for a child with a visual impairment. So with the right kind of support and specific training from his mobility specialist, Eddie can be safer and more independent as he navigates new areas of the school. So if we look at the next slide, we're going to talk about how we can facilitate independence. So Eddie will undertake a familiarization session, and this may have to be done more than once and will entail classroom familiarization, helping Eddie find his bearings in the playground and toilets. Also, Eddie will have to learn the new routes, for example, from his classroom to the lunch hall. Eddie has experienced the odd minor accident, tripping up and bumping into people. So as part of his training program, the mobility specialist will incorporate teaching Eddie pre-cane or protective techniques that Eddie can adopt so that he is more safe as he mobilizes himself around school. At some point in the future, Eddie will benefit from a block of basic road safety training tailored to his visual impairment, and which will prepare him for independent travel as he grows older. Additionally, as Eddie matures, he will be assessed in order to undertake a long cane training program, again to further his safety and independence. Looking at the next slide, we can see that an environmental audit has already been undertaken, And this happened just before Eddie started school. So an environmental audit is when the mobility specialist suggests some physical adaptations of the school premises. Considerations are usually given to areas such as colour contrast, lighting, which has already been mentioned, signage, and removing obstacles. Now, even though Eddie can't differentiate colour, painting the step and stair edges in a bright contrasting colour would make a huge difference. Also important is ensuring that Eddie has the end coat hook and drawer so that it is easy for him to locate and promotes his independence. Also simple reminders such as keeping things in the same place. So those are just some of the things, but there's also Sighted Guide, which we'll see on the next slide. So Eddie is already familiar with Sighted Guide. So what is it? Well, it's just a simple technique that has been developed to guide people with a visual impairment. When would Eddie need or require Sighted Guide? He may need it in unfamiliar areas. Eddie therefore might need guiding at the beginning of year 3 until he is familiar with his environment. Additionally, Eddie might need sight guiding during school trips, on public transportation, in crowded situations, during emergency evacuations, and when his vision is reduced, perhaps when his nystagmus or rapid eye movements are more enhanced. So how do we do sighted guide? Well, let's look at this video now and see how to do it.
You can initiate the guide by touching the back of the hand to the back of the student's hand. Billy is using a modified hand grip at the guide's wrist. The guide should position themselves to the side and slightly in front of the student. When approaching a door, give the student information such as, the door opens away from you on the right. The guide should keep their arm relaxed at their side and walk at a speed which is comfortable for both people. When approaching a turn, the guide can slow down and give the student information such as, we are coming to a left turn. To travel through a narrow space, the guide moves their arm behind their back. This lets the follower know they should move behind the guide and extend their arm to increase the space between them. This increased space allows the two people to move through the narrow space more safely and efficiently. To travel upstairs using sighted guide, tell your student, we have come to stairs which go up and there is a railing on your right. The guide should stay one step ahead of the student and move slowly and safely. To travel downstairs, tell your student, we have come to stairs which go down, and there is a railing on your right. The guide should stay one step below their student. Many students are more cautious coming downstairs than upstairs. When guiding someone to a chair or bench, approach the seat as straight as possible. The guide should put their hand on the surface of the seat. The student can follow the guide's hand to the surface and then turn around on their own to sit down. While traveling using sighted guide, the guide can provide information about the surrounding environment. You should comment on the objects, sounds, and surfaces which can be found in the area. Sighted guide technique can be a very effective way for someone who is visually impaired to travel. This skill can be especially useful when walking in new places and while a young child learns more independent travel skills. The guide must always remember, safety is their responsibility.
So that sighted guide, so the main thing to remember is to walk half a pace in front of the person you are guiding so that they can follow your body movements and anticipate any changes. Due to social distancing, it may not be possible to sight guide in the usual way. Therefore, consult with a mobility specialist who will deem whether it's appropriate or not, if any techniques should be altered or omitted. For more information, please see our website on the screen there. You'll find more information about sighted guide, the environmental audit, and orientation and mobility training.
Hi, it's Ruth again. This is Eddie's profile, and we provide profiles like this to schools after we've done our initial functional vision assessment. We also provide them at transition stages. For example, when a child moves from preschool to primary school, or primary school to secondary school, or secondary school to sixth form provision, or if we hear that it might not necessarily be at the end of a key stage, but if a child happens to move to a new school, we would provide a profile similar to this. As you can see, so with a profile, you can see that it explains Eddie's visual condition and gives strategies for the school to use to help Eddie to access the curriculum as safely and independently as possible. So these strategies include, for example, the best seating position to reduce glare, the optimum font size for reading, ways to access books electronically, but also strategies for outside the classroom, like in PE or in the playground or school trips. Next slide, please. These are links to websites that were mentioned earlier, such as RNIB Bookshare for electronic books and the Partially Sighted Society for some of the equipment that we showed. Next slide, please.
So it's Josh again. So if you do want to look at any of those links, this PowerPoint will be available with the video. Also, on this PowerPoint is this feedback link. We would really appreciate all the feedback. Obviously, this is the first time we've ever done any virtual training, and all feedback is really, really helpful and will be used to try and improve the training that we offer as a service. So if you can click on this SurveyMonkey link, there's just 5 questions. It will take just a couple of minutes, and it will just really help us to support schools moving on into the future. So that is the end of this training session. Thank you so much for joining us. If you do have any questions or want to contact us, all our contact details are there. Our email address is there. So please do get in contact and we will hope to support you in whatever ways we can. Thank you so much.